Welcome to the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the HERHealth podcast, where we explore the issues shaping health and safety and the well-being of women, girls, and diverse people. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Kaitlynn Mendes, a leading researcher and advocate for digital safety and gender equality. Dr. Mendes will help us unpack the growing issue of technology-facilitated sexual violence, or TFSV, a term that captures a wide range of online harms, including non-consensual image sharing, deepfake creation, and cyberflashing. And we'll discuss why language matters, what laws and supports exist, and how parents, educators, and communities can respond with understanding and care. And this conversation is part of the AVA webinar series designed to bridge research to practice to advance equity, safety, and well-being across communities. Well, thank you so much. Welcome to the show, Katie. I truly appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll start off. Can you explain what we mean by technology facilitated sexual violence and why it's important that we move away from older terms like cyberbullying?
Yeah, so TFSV, I know it is a bit of a mouthful, but it's language that we think is really important to move towards. So really, we think of it like an umbrella term. It's a term that refers to a wide range of acts that relate to sexual violence. So these can be acts that take place in the physical world. So let's say a sexual assault. That is somehow facilitated by technologies. So in that case, it'd be an assault that is maybe filmed and then maybe uploaded online and shared with other people without someone's consent. So that's just one example, but could also include acts of sexual violence that take place online or via digital communication technologies. So maybe it's a rape threat. Maybe it's the use of AI deep nude apps to make a deep nude photo of someone else and then share it without consent. So really the point here is that digital technologies is facilitating forms of sexual violence, whether this violence takes place on or offline. So we think that this term is way better than old terms that we use like cyberbullying because of the ways that cyberbullying often minimizes the acts themselves. So we know, for example, when we talk to lots of young people or when we read through different educational curriculum and policies, that maybe something like the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, so sometimes it's been known as revenge porn, that's a term we don't like, but that's often how it's talked about, is often kind of dismissed as a form of bullying, cyberbullying. And in fact, in a case like non-consensual sharing of images, that is actually a criminal offense in Canada, but it's also an offense that really violates someone's rights, their privacy, their bodily autonomy, their sexual autonomy. And so kind of moving away from bullying, which can sometimes be easier to kind of dismiss or minimize, if we're labeling it as a form of sexual violence, that can help signal to people that your rights have really been violated and that, it's right for you to go and get help. And there may be various forms of legal recourse or supports or other kinds of supports out there that you deserve to help you get through this.
Thank you so much for diving into my first question. I remember really back in my middle school days hearing about cases of sextortion and technology facilitated sexual violence, especially in the heartbreaking story of Amanda Todd. And at the time, it was really framed as cyberbullying, but I find it very powerful and important that we're reframing it and recognizing as TSFB, and naming it as a violent act and should be named and addressed by that way. And curious about some common forms of TFSV that young people are experiencing today and how have these evolved with emerging technologies, like you mentioned, deepfakes, AI generated content, and social media platforms.
Yeah, so definitely. So, research that I do through my DIY digital safety project, where we've gone around Canada, talked to over 1,000 teenagers about their experiences of online harms and specifically TFSV. We definitely found that online harassment is a really common form. So that might be someone making sexually suggestive comments about you or your body. It may be harassing you in some kind of way. So that was very, very common. But we also found things like getting intimate images that you didn't ask for. So for girls, this might take the form of an unwanted dick pic, either from maybe an older stranger or from a peer. But also boys receive a lot of non-consensual intimate images as well. So they are really targeted by porn bots. And other kind of links that are trying to get boys to go onto pornographic sites, to get some money from them. So that's really common. And then also for girls, we've historically seen this, but increasingly we're seeing it for boys as well. It's pressure to send intimate images. So whether it's peers or whether it's a stranger, someone, initiating a relationship. We can even in some cases maybe call it a grooming phase, actually kind of like what you said with Amanda Todd. I'm really happy to hear that, I think if that had happened today, we wouldn't call it cyberbullying. We would recognize that it was online grooming, sexual extortion, non-consensual sharing of intimate images, and bullying that she experienced. But for girls, for example, maybe they meet someone online, or maybe it's someone that they know from school or kind of a mutual who they start off with this, they're getting special sexual attention. Someone's being really nice to them. They're complimenting them. They're starting to form a relationship, start to build trust. And then the person really starts to pressure them for intimate images. And one of the really disturbing things that we've seen is that in some cases, if the person says no, they'll do things like, well, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to kill myself if you don't send this to me. Or sometimes it's not that extreme, but they'll say things like, it's clearly a sign you don't love me. They're really kind of making them feel very guilty. So someone sends an image. And for girls, we know that when that happens, so this extortion that we can think of, often for girls, the perpetrator wants more images, or they want them to maybe stay in a relationship. So, if you break up with me, I'm going to send all your friends and family a video. But for boys, we're seeing something very different. We're seeing where they're being catfished. So right now, it's a huge issue all around the world where young boys are specifically being targeted in this very deliberate financial scam, where the perpetrators go online, they target young boys, teenage boys. They pretend that they're a teenage girl, so they'll have these fake profile pictures. They'll start flirting with them. They will then initiate by sending an intimate image of who the boy thinks is a teenage girl, and then ask for one in return. And as soon as the boy sends that image, that's when the extortion begins. And really, it's financial. They want money. Um, and it's really difficult with boys because, we've been talking about girls sending intimate images for a long time, and what support should girls get, but we really have been ignoring boys and young men. And it's been really tragic in Canada and other countries around the world. We've seen some young men, the most extreme harm, dying by suicide, in part because of the messaging that young people are also told, which is often only an idiot would send a naked picture of themselves, or once you send that picture, your life is over. You'll never get to university. You're never going to get a job. This is going to haunt you for the rest of your life. So if these are the messages that young people are being told, it's no wonder that they're going to extreme measures when their intimate image is shared without their consent. They're hurting themselves. In other cases, which is much more common, most people aren't going to die by suicide or attempt suicide when this happens, but they'll do things like they'll stop going to school. They will have a lot of anxiety, incredible amount of stress. And we've had lots of young people tell us about how they engage in self-harm otherwise. So cutting is a really big thing, but also just generally, it really truly does have a very significant impact on their mental health.
Yeah, I can imagine how this could impact so many young people, especially in the age of social media and seeing it like firsthand in high school and middle school, like kind of the rise of that. Yeah, it's really scary. We're going to dive in a little bit further about the idea or debunking the myth that what's on the internet stays on the internet forever. So I'm glad that you brought it up now as a little Easter egg. I wanted to say that I really appreciated at the start of your webinar that you kind of highlighted the pauses of social media and that it's not all doom and gloom, but there are certain very certain risks that you mentioned. and that negative aspects of this can affect people in very different ways and is very much an important part of the conversation in your work.
Yeah.
Um,
And just to kind of reiterate, young people like the internet. They like social media. They like their phones. They like their computer games. They're really important spaces for them. They're important tools for them. They don't want them to be taken away, but they do want more control over what happens. They want better reporting mechanisms so that if something happens, there's an actual consequence and something is done, and they want trusted adults who they can talk to, whether they're adults that they know or who they can speak to in confidence. But having someone who can help them navigate these situations is also really important to them.
Yeah, really good point. And you've studied the links between the digital spaces and gender inequity. And what have you learned from how TFSV disproportionately impacts women, girls, transgender, and genderverse and gender nonconforming people?
Yeah, definitely. So again, we did the survey with over 1,000 Canadian teens, and definitely we can see really big gender differences in the kinds of harms that they're experiencing. So online harassment, mean comments, we can see boys are, also experience some of that harassment as well. But of course, for boys and young men, often the comments, maybe they're linked around or steeped in homophobia or racism. Girls, it can often be around, their body shape, their body type. And of course, if they are racialized or if they're Indigenous, then we can also see them steeped in racism, xenophobia as well. Um, but there's others, there are definitely girls, gender nonconforming people who experience higher rates of certain kinds of harm. So for example, pressure to send these intimate images, having their intimate images shared without their consent is definitely a gendered phenomenon. Other things that I didn't mention already, like cyber stalking, is very gendered. It tends to be girls, women, gender nonconforming people who are stalked and tracked. Although I should mention boys are also tracked and surveyed, but often it's to attack them. So they're not getting sexually assaulted, but they are getting jumped. So there's a big thing right now with a lot of teenage boys, these fight club videos, where teen boys not necessarily like to, but fights are being filmed, and sometimes they're using GPS location features like snap maps to track where someone is, and then someone will be there to film them as they get jumped or into a fight.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember you discussing that in your webinar about the proliferation of online contact and how typically young boys and men are more focused on like that physical aspect of like fighting and things like that being then online as well. So thank you for reiterating that. I really appreciate it. And many people may not realize, like as you mentioned, that there are civil and criminal laws related to TFSV in Canada. So particularly non-consensual distribution of intimate partner images, while other TFSV acts. So there are acts that don't violate criminal laws per se, but they do violate people's rights to bodily autonomy, privacy, and integrity. I'm curious if you could share what legal protections currently exist and where there's still gaps that need more attention.
Yeah. So, okay. So around intimate image sharing, non-consensual intimate image sharing violates Canada's criminal code. So that is always a criminal violation. Now, whether someone actually wants to pursue, criminal charges against someone else is another matter. In many cases, the person who's non-consensually sharing our image might be a peer, they might be a friend, they might be a former partner, they might be someone that we know who, for various reasons, people don't want them to end up with a criminal record. There are also certain communities who may not want to engage with law enforcement because of historic, racism, for example. So there are many reasons why people won't ever go down the criminal proceeding. And then again, in some provinces, there are civil remedies. So you can sue someone if they non-consensually share an intimate image. And provinces like British Columbia, for example, recently introduced a quick takedown mechanism because really, when your intimate images are shared, often the main thing people want is for those images to be gone. And again, when it goes to criminal proceedings, there are actually sometimes some complex processes you have to go to collect the digital evidence. So you have to leave it up there. You have to take screenshots. The screenshots may have to be in a particular format to be admissible in court. but it involves, kind of leaving the content up there as opposed to trying to get it quickly taken down. And so we sometimes have these civil remedies, depending where you are in Canada, that can really quicken that process. They can issue those takedown orders very quickly, and then they can also provide people a means of collecting compensation when that happens. Now, where there are some gaps is around deep fake nude images. This is a really interesting one because Canada doesn't yet have criminal code. It's not in the criminal code yet about creating deep fake nude images. Now, there have been some cases in Canada where adults have created deep nudes of children, and they have been prosecuted under Canada's child pornography. But in terms of like adults creating deep nudes of other adults, it's really kind of this gray area. There are some provinces where, again, their civil laws explicitly cover deep nudes, but in other cases, it's actually not clear because the laws were written before these. They're sometimes in legal kind of language called synthetic images, so non-consensual distribution of like or non-consensual synthetic image, intimate image sharing. But the civil laws, it's really unclear. So in some cases, we're kind of waiting to see how these get tested in courts, and to see what actually happens. But non-consensual deep fake intimate image sharing is definitely a gray area right now.
I can imagine just everyday people being so frustrated about that, especially since it is violating people's rights. Like, this is my sexual integrity and it should be criminal code, but since it is such a gray area, I'm curious how
Yeah.
that'll be prosecuted further.
And those ones were so interesting because we've had some. So actually, there was a case, one of the first times I heard about deep nudes being created, it was a girl in New Jersey, a teenage girl, and some of her classmates at school had created a deep nude of her. And so she reported it to the school. And I can't remember what the consequence for the boys was, but she's actually just recently sued them and also the creators of the AI app, which I think is also quite interesting. Now, in Canada, we've also had cases of teens who have had deep nudes created of themselves. And in some cases, the police were called in, but they weren't really able to do anything because, again, Canada didn't have these laws. And then it's also not clear what the response has been from schools. And in part because schools have a duty to protect the privacy of its pupils, so they won't disclose to the public what the punishment is or what the consequence is. But I think that's something we really need to be having these kind of conversations about. It would also be good to have transparency. And of course, I can understand why people are sexually curious, and I can see how, if you look at some of these AI deep nude ads, they will explicitly say things like, it's not illegal. This isn't illegal. So they're kind of they're really tapping into people's sexual curiosity, which is a normal part of adolescent development. But what they're missing out on is by creating these deep nudes without someone's consent, how you are violating their rights and their autonomy and their sexual integrity. So that's an important piece that's really missing out for them. And, you know, we're not having these conversations with teens. So again, I don't want to excuse anybody who non-consensually creates deep nudes of other people, but I can see how maybe they hadn't thought about how creating these nudes is violating someone else's rights because we've never had those conversations with them. And the way that these apps are marketed towards them makes it seem like it's harmless. It's not real. It's not authentic. Don't worry. Like, you're not actually, hurting someone. You are maybe satisfying your own kind of sexual curiosity in creating these apps. So definitely from my perspective, and I've looked at a lot of the deep nude apps, we really need to, well, I think they need to be totally regulated, is kind of a key thing. And we need to just be better at having these kinds of challenging conversations, not just with young people, but with everybody.
Definitely. Thank you so much for diving into that. I've learned just a new way of thinking about building healthy relationships, especially when having these conversations with teens to add maybe a technology portion as well into the conversation. And I wanted to ask, when someone is experiencing technology facilitated sexual violence, it can be very difficult for families and service providers, as you kind of mentioned, to know how to respond. So I'm curious, what are some of the key do's and don'ts for supporting youth who may have been affected?
Oh, that's such great advice. Okay, first thing I would say, if you're an adult and you have a young person in your life who maybe discloses something to you, I think the first thing you need to do is try not to kind of yell at them or shame them or blame them, even if maybe they've done something wrong. The first thing you need to do is really kind of like thank them for disclosing that to you, acknowledging the distress that they may be feeling, and then trying to work through solutions together. So, really trying to be non-judgmental and supportive is the first thing that teens want. And we know from talking to teens that when they disclose something to an adult who is judgmental, who doesn't give them that emotional support, it is the number one barrier that stops them from going to an adult the next time something happens. And we have so many like really sad quotes from teens who will tell us these experiences. I went to my mom, I told a teacher, I told, a trusted adult, and all they did was kind of blame me, shame me. So I will never tell them again, or I will never go to another adult again. And that's really what we don't want, because now we have teens who may be trying, and it's not about teens can never figure things out for themselves. But there are certain cases, like if you were experiencing sextortion, sexual extortion, if you were having intimate images shared without your consent, there may be cases when you really do need adult support. You may need these kind of mechanisms to really help you get through these situations. So really try to listen without judgment, find out what it is that the young person needs, what do they want to happen next, as best as you can. Try to respect that. It may not always be possible. There may be certain cases where you might have a duty to report, you may have to escalate, but trying to involve the young person in what happens next is incredibly important. The next thing you can do is, you may not have the expertise to deal with this, right? So, oh my gosh, so someone has just told me that they're being extorted. I have no idea what to do. Don't worry, there are places that do know what to do, so reach out to them. Kids Help Phone Line is fabulous Canadian resource. You can phone, you can text, available in multiple languages. You can call on behalf of a child, or a child can get in touch with them as well. If it's something like it kind of depends on what's happening, but if it's something like extortion, there are certain, hotlines that you can call. Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, for example. There's also other websites like Cybertip, that's run by the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. They also run a website called Need Help Now. That's a really great one for teens themselves. And that's really great, especially if you've had, like, say, intimate images of yourself that are shared without consent. They have lots of different resources that they can connect you to. But definitely Kids Help Phone Line, Need Help Now are really great. If you're an adult, there's also another website we really recommend called techsafety.ca. And they can provide you really great resources for supporting someone who's experiencing tech-facilitated sexual violence. So maybe they're in, a relationship with someone and there's dating violence. It can kind of help you to support that person as they're navigating a really unhealthy relationship. Or that's a great website if you want to know more about how do you collect digital evidence that you may need in court. They have very, very detailed guides on their website of the format, the kind of information that you have to collect. So for example, don't just screenshot one part of the conversation. You may need to screenshot the whole conversation. If you think that you're being cyber stalked, they have really great resources and tips on how to check your devices to see if there's like any malware or spyware. So that is like an amazing, amazing resource that we really recommend, in particular adults supporting other people experiencing TFSV to go through.
Thank you so much for putting all those resources ahead. I wrote them down, so I'll add them into the show notes for everybody so they're a little bit easier access.
Can I add one more? Actually, two
Yeah.
more that I forgot. The one that I totally forgot is Project Arachnid. So if you are a teenager and if you have had intimate images of yourself shared without consent, this is a website you can go to where you register the image, and they have this technology called hashing technology. So they're basically putting like a digital watermark on the image. And if anybody tries to upload that image to any public website, it is removed like in real time before it's ever uploaded. Or if your image is already existing on websites, they issue quick takedown notices to get those images taken offline. So that's Project Arachnid. So that's only if you're under the age of 18. But if you're over the age of 18, there's another website in the UK called Stop NC DII.org. And that's when where you can go to have intimate images. It's the same technology. It's just one's for over 18s and one's for under 18. So those are two really good ones. So again, challenging this message that once your intimate images are out there, they're out there forever. That's not necessarily the case. And there are ways of getting them removed.
Thank you so much. That answers my next question. And you also kind of went further into the idea that, yes, an image that's on the internet, it doesn't have to be on the image there forever, on the internet forever. There are lots of places to go and to search. So thank you so much for sharing those.
Yeah, and
And
then the other message, can I
oh,
just add, I'm sorry,
yeah,
is also
absolutely.
if you have an intimate image shared without your consent, it can feel like the end of the world. It can feel like, oh my God, this is, and it must be awful. It must be awful to feel that you're your rights, your privacy has been violated. But the message we want to say to young people is it's something you can get over. If you know someone who's had their intimate images shared without consent, rather than shaming them, right, which is often what happens, we need to recognize, hey, it was that person's rights who were violated. How can we support them? How can we shame the perpetrators who are sharing these images? They're the ones who have done something wrong here. So let's put the shade on them and not on the person whose intimate image was shared without their consent. So that's like one thing I think we can do to change the culture. So if someone, you're in a WhatsApp chat and an intimate image of someone else gets popped up, you should first delete it, report it, block that person because what has just happened is illegal. And you should, call out the person who's sharing it and be like, that is not okay. Not just that it's illegal, but that is not okay the way that you are non-consensually sharing that image. So let's call these people out when we see it happening.
It does. Thank you so much for like making it very actionable steps. 'Cause I know sometimes like this whole field can feel very daunting and like, what can I do if I witness non-consensual intimate images being shared? So I really truly appreciate you diving into that further. And I wanted to hear more from your perspective of what you mentioned schools, community organizations, and potentially policymakers could do to create safer online environments and potentially promote digital literacy.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a big question. So, I mean, schools, I think one thing that they can do is stop the messaging about like only an idiot would share a nude image, only an idiot would add a stranger. Because that's, let's be honest, is like part of digital cultures is, talking to strangers. Now, of course, it comes with risk, but it also comes with potential opportunities. You can meet new friends. You could maybe meet a new romantic partner. Dating apps wouldn't exist if we only ever talked to people that we knew. So let's stop with the abstinence-based approach, which is basically like, don't ever sext, don't ever use digital technologies as part of your intimate relationships. Now, there's certain things you can and should be doing before you use digital technologies in these ways. Like you should have a conversation with someone. Hey, do they want to receive an intimate image of me? Let's ask them before I just send it to them. Two, what are you going to do if I send it to you? How are you going to keep it? How are you going to keep it private? Are you going to delete it? Are you going to save it in a private folder? Who are you going to show it to? Not to say that these conversations is going to stop someone necessarily from violating that kind of trust. They may share it otherwise, but at least if you've had an explicit conversation about it, hopefully you can feel better in knowing, hang on a minute, I'm not the one who's done something wrong. So even just that little conversation can help turn someone's shame and guilt into maybe outrage, which could be used to have them take action and find a way to kind of remedy the way that their rights have been violated. So let's have conversations. Other things we say to young people, if you are going to take intimate images of yourself, try not to have identifying features. Maybe don't show your face if you have tattoos, if you have other, obviously a bedroom with your school logo in the background or something like that. Really try to kind of protect your anonymity in that sense. Um, Schools, and again, I don't blame schools because they are asked to solve so many problems. But we really do need curriculum update. Our team has reviewed the educational curriculum and policies in all of Canada's provinces and territories and really found that they're not talking about TFSV. And it makes sense. Sometimes these policies are updated every 10 plus years. And if we think of how much has changed with digital technologies over the past 10 years, it's not a surprise, but they really do need some updating when it comes to tech. If I'm thinking about policy, if I'm thinking about laws, That can be much more complicated. And again, like, how do we write these laws that are future proof, that have kind of taken into account all the different ways that tech has changed? One of the things when it comes to laws is that there are existing laws on the book that you can use that apply to digital cases. So stalking is an example, criminal harassment, um, online harassment, threats, um, indecent communication with a child. There are laws on the book that can apply to digital. So we don't necessarily need all new laws to deal with some of the harms that are happening in online spaces, but we could certainly use some new ones. Like right now, there isn't an explicit law dealing with the deep nudes. We do need something that explicitly deals with that, is one example. But my big thing is really we need to better regulate social media companies, these tech companies,
Mm.
because they know what they're doing. They know all of the ways that their features harm, can cause harm. And they do very little to take action to mitigate against that.
Oh,
Sorry, a little tickle in my throat.
no worries.
Um, So they have an incredible amount of internal research where they know exactly how their apps are being used, misused, I should say, and they really should be doing more, but they don't. And my very cynical view is because it's profitable for them. Every interaction, every engagement generates data, which is what makes them money. They're getting data from us, they're selling that data, it's profitable. Content that makes us feel happy, sure, can generate engagement, but content that makes us anxious or sad or scared or feel like we're missing out, oh, that's where the big money is. That's what keeps us hooked on our platforms. And so unfortunately, if it was just like the happy, oh my gosh, look at these cute kittens, or look at like these feel good stories, if that's what kind of our social media engagements and interactions were filled with, amazing, but it's not. And so I do think we really need to better regulate these companies, because time and time again, too, I hear from young people when they see content of someone's harassing them, someone is posting inappropriate pictures, someone's created a fake account of me, a fake Instagram account, and they're pretending to be me. When these accounts are reported so often, the platforms do nothing. Or fine, I close this account, but it's too easy to start another fake account to harass. So there really needs to be better guardrails to stop the harmful things. And let's make more space for the kind of content and interactions that young people actually want. And they won't do that unless they're forced to make changes by government. I think that's the big thing. They won't do it on their own, out of the goodness of their hearts. The individual CEOs may be lovely people, but fundamentally they are mandated to return a profit and to act in ways that return the biggest profit for their corporation. And we are out of our minds if we think that they are going to act in any other way. They will not do it unless they're forced to.
Mhm. Thank you so much for talking about how rage baiting or emotionally charged content is at play here, and how there needs to be regulation of larger companies and institutions at hand, and it doesn't have to always be the individual level of prevention.
No, we can't solve all of the problems. And I mean, unfortunately, I think regulation is important. Regulation doesn't solve everything, of course. But I'm also not super hopeful about the future of regulation when we look at the states right now. If we look at all the tech bros who are in,
Mhm.
the Trump administration's pocket, who are there directing policies, they are pushing for deregulation, not more regulation. And that really worries me. So we need it. Canada doesn't have to follow the states' example. We can chart a different path. We can look towards Europe. We can look towards, other countries that have better models with some regulation and control, and that's who we should be emulating. Definitely not looking to our southern neighbors.
Definitely. Thank you so much for diving into that. And then finally, for our listeners who want to take action, and what are some practical steps or resources they can turn for education, prevention, or support purposes?
I love techsafety.ca. I think that it's a really great website. Again, especially if you're an adult who works with young people, that's like a fabulous resource. Again, it talks about how you can have non-judgmental conversations, the importance of that. Um, I do think that the sites that I've already mentioned, like Kids Help Phone, Need Help Now, Project Arachnid, those are really great places where you can turn to for alternative supports. Our own website, DIYdigitalsafety.ca, we have lots of different resources. We also have some really great guides on like what to expect if you contact the Kids Help Phone line. What to expect if you contact Need Help Now. At what point will your disclosure remain anonymous? At what point might they have to call your parents in or the police? What are the different languages? If maybe you're not English speaking or French speaking. There are some of these platforms service people who speak other kinds of languages. So our website has some really great resources. We have some infographics on like what happens if you're being sextorted? What happens if someone is threatening to share your intimate images without your consent? And again, our resources are all available in English and French and some in additional languages, including Indigenous languages. So we really encourage you to come to our website and check it out and get in touch with us. If there is a resource that you need that doesn't yet exist, let us know and we can try to create that for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mendes, for diving into that. Was there anything else that you would like to talk about or we may have missed in this conversation today?
I think we've covered it all. I think you've done a great job. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the HERHealth podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.